the fuzzy, misty looking thing. It's a little bit there. I don't know what that's about. Okay, let's see here. Okay, we left off with the questions, and then I think she's going to describe some examples because this chapter is called One Student's Choices. Brian's story shows one way of selecting archetypes. I hope it gives you a sense of what the selection process feels like. Brian had an immediate connection to the author, the hermit, the scholar, and the scribe, among others. The author was an obvious choice for him because of his academic background and his occupation as a writer. Upon meeting Brian, for instance, what is almost immediately evident is that he relies on the mental plane for his work. Brian also related strongly to the hermit archetype, recognizing that his emotional well-being and creativity were dependent on his being able to have solitary time. Here again, much of the physical life has been designed consistently around the demands of his hermit. What made the hermit an intimate archetype for him was that it is a very constant characteristic, rather than one that comes into play every now and again. A good rule in general when considering your archetypes is that they must represent characteristics that are continually at work in several areas of your life. The scholar was also a good fit for Brian because, as an author of nonfiction books, much of his work requires assiduous, solitary research, sometimes something he quite enjoys doing. Brian eventually determined that the scribe was less significant to him than the author and that the scholar archetypes, because scribes traditionally did not create books, they copied manuscripts. After taking time to think through the differences that characterize these two archetypes, he ruled out the scribe. You will need to give the same kind of attention to your choices, because so many archetypes will initially seem to have intimate connection with you. Upon careful scrutiny, however, you will be able to identify the fine lines of distinction that completely reshape your archetypal wheel. Brian added the judge to his initial group for two reasons. Like his father, he has a strong critical streak, which in its negative aspect manifests as constant criticism of those around him for what are often minor flaws or lapses. But its constructive aspect, the judge, serves him well in his profession. He began his writing career as a critic, and his critical eye has allowed him to supplement his writing income with occasional editorial jobs. The significant aspect of this choice was that Brian chose the judge based on the recognition of its shadow qualities in himself. He was able to admit to himself that he has a highly judgmental nature, and that this aspect of himself contributes a great deal to the growth challenges that he has to confront in his spiritual and personal life. Although it seemed counterintuitive at first, Brian also chose both the monk and the hedonist as key archetypes. He spends a lot of time exploring and practicing spiritual paths, but he also loves good food and wine. He admitted to being puzzled at the apparent contradiction himself, but on reflection he recalled that in the Middle Ages, the Christian monks planted and cultivated many of the first vineyards of Europe. And so the connection may be paradoxical, but neither incongruous nor unprecedented. The monk represents, for example, a spiritual life of discipline and self-reflection that is essential to how Brian supports his inner life. Spiritual knowledge and his tools for inner growth provide the nurturing that his monk and hermit require for balance. And these balanced aspects of his psyche in turn serve to maintain the work of his author. Together, these archetypes form a team, which is their nature. Brian also recognized the teacher in himself, not simply because he occasionally gives writing courses, but because his own work he is also seeking to teach his readers. From another perspective, he is always welcoming new teachers into his life as a part of his work. The old job offer cliche of learn what you earn never seemed more appropriate. Brian's most interesting choice was his 12th archetype, the rebel. Because of his problematic relationship with his father, a strict disciplinarian, Brian developed a tendency to go against established authority, not only in the political arena, where he was active in the civil rights and anti-war movements of the 1960s, but also in his work. Moreover, his rebel aspect is precisely what so richly supports his author and his monk, because he seeks to challenge conventional thought and forego new paths of insight and spiritual interpretation for others. In his early years, his rebel emerged through its angry and defensive aspects and led him into prolonged experimentation with drugs and alternative lifestyle. But as he quelled his anger, his rebel became more of a support to his life, assisting his psyche in seeing and contributing to life as it could be, as opposed to destroying what is. After he selected his 8 individual archetypes, Brian began to see that his contract had to do in large measure with helping other people with their own writing on many different but interconnected levels. For years he had believed that he was intended to be a writer and produce significant works on his own. Over time, however, he came to appreciate the various roles he played not only as an original author, but also as an editor, collaborator, teacher, and facilitator, even helping other authors or would-be authors find the appropriate agent or publisher for their own works, all of which deal in some form with the evolution of spiritual awareness. This last insight required a certain degree of humility. Writers, like most artists, need a large degree of healthy egotism just to survive in a competitive and often unfriendly marketplace. As a creative person, you have to believe in yourself, even when your work is rejected or receives harsh criticism. But Brian also needed to let go of his attachment to having all his projects advance his own name or professional reputation in some linear way. Once he was able to do that, he realized that the richness and the diversity of his vocation was not a sign of having failed at being a great author, but actually represented a contract of far more significance, if less grandiose, proportions. In an insight that surprised him, Brian realized that the religious artists of the Middle Ages often worked in relative anonymity to produce great art, literature, and music. Individual aggrandizement was considered less important than contributing to the growth of knowledge, wisdom, and spiritual power in the larger world. Although such an attitude may seem impractical, if not actually counterproductive in today's world, in the end, Brian found that it suited his nature and his archetypical support group extremely well. The fact that you do not have a primary connection to a particular archetypical pattern does not prelude your being able to enjoy the world associated with that archetype. You don't have to have the artist or musician in your support group to love or enjoy art or music. But attempting to align yourself to an archetype that is not one of your 12 companions can sometimes cause psychological and emotional trauma, because incidents of personal rejection result, all due to trying to be what you are not meant to be. 2 classmates of mine from college were both in the music department. One was a natural musician and the other was merely a music major. During their final performance of the senior year, the musician closed her eyes when she played, and we could all see the spirit of the music being expressed through her. By contrast, the music major played with her eyes open, conscious of every note. Although her performance was technically correct, it lacked feeling and confidence so evident in the musician. When you are acting outside of the guiding field of your 12 companions, you lack the magnetic force field to pull together the opportunities or relationships that you desire. This same imbalance occurs when you attempt to initiate agreements with certain people or succeed at a particular occupation but lack the archetypical template. As I listen to people describe the difficult times they are having professionally, I realize that many of them are pursuing a life they were not meant to live. And all the workshops in the world, all the education they can attain, cannot bring about the success they are seeking. Either you have a good investment instincts or you don't. On target stock market sense comes from the gut of someone who has an archetype associated with financial risk taking, such as the gambler or Midas. And while those two archetypes by no means guarantee financial success, they certainly generate more financial opportunities than other archetypes. How do you know if you are simply not trying hard enough to realize your skills or contract? Perhaps the time just isn't right for you, for your tree to bear fruit, even though you might indeed be standing under the right one. Perhaps you are working the wrong aspect of the musician archetype, for instance. Maybe you are meant to work in the production side of the industry or as a musician's agent instead of actually being a performer. How do you know that you are not just bailing out when you should be hanging in there? It's an easy answer and a hard one. All clarity about the self is dependent on your self-esteem, your knowledge of yourself. A strong sense of self can sense when it's going in the right direction and when it's knocking on the wrong door. When you know yourself, you know exactly when you are not being true to yourself. Your gut instincts alone provide you with all the guidance you need. Your intuition will help you find your archetype and your path in life. When deciding on which archetypes belong in your support group, trust those instincts above all else. You'll need to practice your critical powers of discrimination, of course, weighing factors in favor of or against including a particular archetype. But in the end, you should listen to your inner voice. All else being equal, the deciding factor between two archetypes that stack up about the same in logical terms will be the one that your gut tells you plays a key role in your life. Okay, so the next chapter, the chakras, your spiritual backbone. If anyone's been listening to this channel for a long time, you know I'm totally into the chakras. It's my thing. So let's just read a little bit more, because why not? The chakras, your spiritual backbone. If one is not oneself a sage or a saint, Aldous Huxley once wrote, the best thing one can do in the field of metaphysics is to study the works of those who were, and who, because they have modified their merely human mode of being, were capable of a more than merely human kind and amount of knowledge. That is why we study the writings of the great mystics of the world's religions, and the lives of the masters who have founded those religions. The masters and the mystics have tapped into underground stream of spiritual knowledge that flows beneath the bedrock of all great traditions, uniting them and washing away their surface differences. Through these spiritual guides, we gain access to collective wisdom that feeds the human spirit, filtering into our psyches, souls, and biology. In a symbolic sense, the teaching of the mystics, based on their own immediate experience of the divine, form our spiritual backbone, radiating out into every aspect of our lives. But there is another kind of spiritual backbone that is related to the wisdom of the masters and the 5 stages of the sacred contract. The system of energy centers known as the chakras defines and supports our spiritual life, much the way the spinal column, along which they are traditionally located, supports our physical body. Like the stages of a contract, they too follow a progression that reflects our spiritual development from childhood through maturity. But in a more literal sense, the chakras also connected to the everyday functions of our bodies and minds. They regulate everything from our survival instincts, sex drive, self esteem, to our emotions, intellect, will, and spiritual aspirations. A knowledge of how they function and how they help you to function is essential to a complete understanding of your sacred contract. Our energy autonomy. When I first began doing intuitive readings, the data that I received did not come to me in any specific order. I would sense an emotional pattern and then the physical problem that had arisen from it, but the energy information was not organized. Over time, my readings became more structured and unfolded in layers. First, I would sense an emotion or trauma, then a physical illness or disease. At a certain point, the order switched, and I saw the physical content and problems first, followed by the emotional and psychological issues, and finally insights into the spiritual issues. I did not realize that these layers of information followed the natural alignment of the chakras until I wrote The Creation of Health in 1988. Indeed, these 7 centers are like an energy spinal cord through which the life force, or prana, flows into our physical body. Each one represents a different configuration of physical, emotional, and psychological concerns. Eastern religions have determined the spiritual meaning of the chakras in a way that matches perfectly to the psychological and physical information that I gleaned from my readings. To me, the chakras are our energy anatomical system. In Sanskrit, the language of the ancient Indian seers who first identified these energy centers, the word chakra, pronounced chakra, means wheel or circle. The English word cycle and cyclone are derived from the same root. Chakras are traditionally pictured as lotus blossoms with varying numbers of petals, each inhabited by the energy affiliated with a sacred deity, with a characteristic color, sacred syllable, and animal symbol attached to it. The ancient seers and yogis experienced the energy of the chakras as constantly spinning. I find their functions somewhat analogous to that of the hard drive of a modern computer, a powerful disk constantly in motion that provides vast amounts of information while also helping to run other major programs of the computer itself. The chakras concentrate and transform the enormous psychophysical energy that is stored in different parts of your body into spiritual energy and distribute it throughout your entire system. According to the spiritual systems of the East, the chakras ascend in a line from the first or root chakra at the base of the spine through the 7th chakra just above the crown of the head. Between them, in ascending order, the other 5 chakras correspond to the genitals, the lower intestine, solar plexus and navel, heart, throat, and pineal gland or third eye. Although each of the chakras corresponds to a different part of the body, they are not material and actually reside within subtle energy sheaths that surround the body. Where physical and psychic energies interpenetrate each other. These These invisible but highly potent sheaths, or levels of psychic energy, are sometimes called the mental, emotional, etheric, and astral bodies, and they extend well beyond the physical dimensions of our frame. During my years of doing health readings, I could sense only the 7 energy centers of the chakras. When I began to get impressions of archetypical patterns, however, I sensed an additional center that I consider to be the 8th chakra, where our archetypical energies reside. While the 7 lower chakras are largely personal in nature, relaying information that reflects the physical, emotional, psychological, and spiritual details of our life, the 8th chakra is transpersonal, connecting to the infinite source of all archetypical energies. It also maintains a connection to every individual body and soul. To get a sense of the activity of this chakra, imagine a 3-dimensional infinity sign whose one arm encompasses and spins through your body in energy sheaths, as the other extends out into the universe. Unlike the 7 chakras, they are directly involved in your physical autonomy. Your 8th chakra is like a Mobius strip that runs between the personal unconscious and the collective unconscious, linking the literal and symbolic dimensions, your personal life and the impersonal universe. This Mobius strip represents a continual current of cosmic intelligence that feeds your psyche. Because the 8th chakra contains your archetypical patterns, it is also the home of your sacred contract. In physical terms, the 8th chakra is located about an arm's length above the crown of the head. In the esoteric golden light meditation, Taoists, adepts visualize an energy body that appears like one's own body, but made of luminous crystal, standing atop the head at an arm's length in height. The crown of the head of your energy body then would correspond to the location of your 8th chakra. In addition to archetypes, the 8th chakra also holds patterns of experience and soul knowledge that are inherent in human consciousness. The archetypal plane to which the 8th chakra connects acts as a magnetic field that organizes life on this planet as well as in our psyche. Its influences are variously referred to as Mother Nature or Gaia, the natural order of things, or even the law of physics. A wide range of teachers, from classic theologians such as Thomas Aquinas and Augustine, to contemporary spiritual writers such as Matthew Fox, maintain that there are natural laws of the spirit that operate within each of us and that need not be taught to us directly. We are born already knowing these archetypical truths. That murder, stealing, and lying are wrong, for instance. We are born territorial, and we accept without question that it is against the law of nature for a mother to harm her children. We are also born imprinted with the universal laws such as cause and effect, choice and consequence, or magnetic attraction. These laws are represented as much in physics as in the spiritual laws of karma, and they are part of the collective body of divine wisdom imprinted into the 8th chakra. We may have to be awakened to the presence of these truths within us, perhaps by a parent, mentor, or spiritual guide, but we are bound by them nonetheless. After I sensed the presence of the 8th chakra, the structure and nature of my readings changed again. Now the archetypical patterns came to me first, and I followed their subtle currents into that individual's personal energy field and saw them stir the psyche, then move into conscious mind, the emotional body, and finally enter into a physical manifestation in that person's life. The child archetype and its patterns of vulnerability, for example, to which we can all relate, takes on a more personal identity as it connects to each individual psyche. This was true of Jessie, a young woman I met in a workshop. Her inner child first manifested as a deep-seated fear of living alone, although she was not consciously aware of the reason. She grew up in a comfortable home in a safe neighborhood and had never been harmed or threatened there, so an atmosphere of both emotional and physical security had surrounded her all her life. Yet Jessie's inner child held enormous authority over her emotional and physiological well-being. Once she understood that we all have a child archetype at work within our lives, she was able to identify hers in action. Specifically, fears of being kidnapped would overwhelm her when she was home alone at night. As a result, she kept lights on all night long and had sophisticated alarm system installed. As soon as Jessie got into bed, she felt as she had when, as a little girl, she had waited for her parents to come home. Even with a babysitter, she felt safe only once they were back where they belonged. Jessie found it easy to relate her personal fears and behaviors to the aspects of the child archetype known as the abandoned child. Some of the characteristics that are inherent in the abandoned child are feeling as though your emotional needs do not matter to your parents, and seeing the entire world as a place you will never be able to handle alone. The universal archetype of the abandoned child was directly connected to the aspects of Jessie's personal life. This initial insight marked the beginning of a process of self-discovery through which Jessie could approach her fears through her abandoned child, which gave her some distance and detachment as she investigated her relationship with her parents, asking herself questions such as, what is the symbolic purpose behind these fears? How can you change these fears into strengths? And are there other areas in your life or other relationships in which the child projects its authority? Helped her sort out her emotions. Jessie realized that she had not been born with these fears but had developed them as a teenager. They became more intense the older she got, because getting older represented independence and living alone. In fact, her parents had encouraged her throughout her childhood to think of finding a place of her own as soon as she was out of high school, because they felt it was important that she learn how to take care of herself. They also wanted Jessie to become strong enough on her own so that she would not make decisions about her life based on fear. They didn't want her, for example, to get married out of a desire for protection rather than for love. Although Jessie realized intellectually that her parents had wanted her to move out not to get rid of her, but to help her learn to be effective on her own, she was still upset with them. Yet Jessie was able to begin working with that insight, beginning with her 8th chakra and threading it through her 7th and her 6th all the way down to her 1st. With each chakra, she investigated her fear of the dark within the meaning and context of the characteristics of that energy center. When she visualized her 4th or heart chakra, for instance, where the emotions reside, she saw that she was really quite angry at her parents. And as she came to realize the wisdom of her parents' decision for her, she resolved that anger, and with it, her fear. For Jessie, this process opened a door of personal transformation. The abandoned child emerged from its shadow and became a source of strength, reminding her that she need no longer fear the unpredictability of the outside world and the onset of adulthood. You too can apply the chakras to each archetype to help you uncover further indications of your contract. If you feel that you touch on an issue that needs deeper work, I encourage you to seek the help of a therapist or spiritual director. Okay, so now we're going to read the archetype that we left off at, which I put a little stone in here. It must have fallen out. It did. Well, what do you know about that? Okay, so we left off at femme fatale, so we're going to read gambler. The gambler is a risk taker who plays the odds. This archetype has many more aspects than are commonly considered, including not just card sharps, and racetrack gamblers, but also drug addicts, entrepreneurs, day traders. The gambler is also active in the psyche of people who take risks in politics and other social activities that amount to gambling with one's reputation. From an energetic perspective, gambling is an attempt to outrun the speed at which ordinary change happens. Acquiring great wealth in a casino in one throw of the dice, or by winning the lottery, is a spectacular experience, not only because of the money, because of the experience of the comprehension of time. The drama of trying to outrun the odds is the psychic lock on the gambler within a person's psyche. The positive aspect of this archetype manifests in the following hunches and in the belief in one's intuition, even in the face of universal doubt. From real estate ventures to scientific research, hunches have often yielded fruitful outcomes. To assess whether you are a gambler, review your ability to follow your intuition and what others consider risky inner guidance. Ask yourself, how many of your decisions are based on gut instinct rather than facts and figures? You can evaluate your relationship to the shadow gambler according to whether you have a compulsion. Some people who are obsessed with winning lotteries and striking it rich at casino tables, or get rich quick or pyramid schemes, may spend relatively little money compared to professional gamblers, but their focus on finding ways to beat the odds is a central part of their life. A related form of gambling may affect the way you focused on looking for lucky breaks in your relationships, rather than doing the hard psychic work needed to make them succeed. Films: Steve McQueen, The Cincinnati Kid, Shadow. Paul Newman, Jackie Gleason, and George C. Scott, Shadow, in The Hustler. Woody Harrelson and Wesley Snipes in White Men Can't Jump. Edith Evans in The Queen of Spades. Clive Owen in Croupier. Roger Ducenche in Bob Le Flambeur, Bob the Gambler. Stop. Religion and myth: Jason and Odysseus, heroic figures of Greek legend who fearlessly gambled against the odds, risking life and limb to achieve their goals. Kunawabi, Native American Pauti figure known as a gambler who takes many risky adventures and who also brings night and illness.